Welcome to Let's Talk About It. I'm Maria Keffler.
I'm Erin Brewer.
And I'm May Lyle.
And thanks for being here with us. Today we're going to talk about a swimmer and trying to figure out how to really address this in a way that gets to the heart of the issue. This is a male swimmer who has been decimating women's records. And we have a lot of headlines such as transgender UPenn swimmer Leah Thomas smashes records during weekend. But we also have a number of comments from teammates who are concerned about this male who is basically appropriating women's sports. And one of the things that I was thinking about that makes me really sad is that this fella who used to compete as a male, he's either a cheat or he's got some mental health issues that are being completely overlooked. And that makes me really sad. Either way, what's he going to look back in 10 years and think his legacy has been?
I'm not an athlete, but I can only imagine how frustrating this must be for women who have worked all of their lives to compete at the collegiate level. I have a good friend who she tried out for the Olympics in 1984 in swimming. She was one of the last ones cut from the Olympic team, and that was devastating to her because she said, that's all I did from the time I was a child was swim. I know these swimmers, they're at the pool at 5 o'clock in the morning. They're at the pool until it closes in the evening. And to have worked so hard for so long and then have everything taken away from you so easily by a man, because we know men have physiological advantages over women. They do.
Absolutely. And to see those second and third place girls who come in second and third place and think that something is really wrong. And I was very pleased to read that some of the females are of his teammates are speaking up, and which is going to have to be done in order to say, hey, enough is enough. This is wrong.
Well, and one of the things that made me sad is I read a report about one of the teammates who's speaking out. And first of all, they're being vilified and, being called unsportsmanlike, being called transphobic, when in fact what they're doing is standing up for their rights as women in women's sports. But this one interview said that the coach wants to win at all costs and is willing to basically throw these women under the bus in order to win. And I did an interview with a researcher who is actually very pro-transgender, but he found that even after a year of being on estrogen and on testosterone suppressing medications, that male-bodied athletes had a profound advantage, up to 10%. And this is again a very pro-transgender doctor who did this research. And if they're finding, 10% may not seem like much to most people, but when you're talking about at competitive levels, 10% can be the difference between first place and maybe sixth or seventh or eighth place. And so that's
or not making the team at all.
Exactly.
Because at this level, they're really competing for fractions of a second.
Exactly. And one of the things that was really frustrating to me when I see the media coverage of this, I have this picture here and it says, it's got a picture of a male and it says, Leah Thomas as pictured as Will before she transitioned. This is a picture of Will before he decided to pretend to be a woman or developed some kind of mental health issue that turned into gender dysphoria to the point that he felt like he needed to insist that he was born in the wrong body. Either way, again, this is somebody who's been let down by our society and is in addition to those he's competing against. And our whole society is being let down by going along with this fraud, this, a fiasco of us calling this man a woman throughout all these news articles, throughout all the coverage, instead of referring to him as Will, a male who's pretending to be a female. They're suggesting that this is Leah, who used to be Will before she kind of decided to come out as transgender.
It's really ridiculous. I mean, he's a ringer. He's a ringer on this women's team, and it is sad that a coach is willing to throw all the other girls under the bus just to win. I've heard a number of people say, well, women just should just refuse to compete. Women just shouldn't. And I said that a few times. Women should just quit competing. I don't disagree with that, but I think we need to appreciate, again, these women have struggled, have tried, have fought all their lives to get to the level that they're at. And if they don't compete, if they take a stand against this, they're done. They won't compete again. They won't be allowed to be on the team because, as we've seen, women who stand up for their rights are vilified. This is nothing new. We've seen this every time historically women have stood up for our rights. We've first had to go through this period of vilification, of being treated worse than second-class citizens. And so we need to have some compassion for these women who they want to compete. These are elite swimmers. They deserve to compete, and they deserve to get on the block and have the hope that they can win. That's why we have women's sports.
That's why we have women's sports. And I think
Exactly.
that that's crucial, that we have women's sports, because we acknowledge that there are physiological differences. And in order for women to have a fair chance of winning any competitions, we need to have a women's category.
Mhm.
Exactly. And there was a picture of a relay team that had a mixed relay team. And just having the two males next to the two females, you could obviously see the physical differences. And you're exactly right. These women need to be able to compete, not against a man, but against other women.
And one of the concerns that I have, it's not so much an issue in swimming, but in team sports. If we start allowing males to compete in team sports, that really puts women at risk. When you look at the size difference, the physiological differences, bigger bone structure, more muscle mass, women are really in danger competing on teams against male bodied people. And again, I want to just call them male. I'm so tired of having to use this kind of convoluted language to talk about them. These are men who are competing against women who are pretending that they're women, and it's putting women at risk, both for competitions, for scholarships, for winning, but also physically when they compete on team sports.
Oh, and we've seen that before. Fallon Fox, the man fighter who fights women, cracked a woman's skull. And this was also an elite fighter who said she'd never felt so overpowered in her life. We need to take the language back. We need to call these men men. You know what? There's nothing wrong with being a man. It's okay to be a man. There's nothing wrong with being a woman. It's okay to be a woman. We need to use that language, and we need to call people what they are.
And if he wants to compete against males wearing, a female swimming suit, I guess that's fine. It's fair, if he really, if he wants to grow his hair long, wear some lipstick, and put on a women's swimming suit, that's his right. But it is not his right to compete against women.
Well, and I've also heard people argue that, well, if we're going to restrict transgender athletes to their biological sex, that puts them at a disadvantage. And they start arguing, well, what about, women who have a distinct advantage over other women? Well, you know what? We don't put horses in greyhound races. Greyhounds can race, and there are some greyhounds that are not good enough to race. And in some horse races, there are some horses who aren't good enough to race in the Belmont. But
bicyclists against NASCAR, in a NASCAR race, they're different categories, and we have those categories for a reason.
We do. And we need to get back to respecting those categories, because we're not respecting women by allowing men into women's sports.
We're
Exactly.
also not respecting our society at large by perpetrating this, this absurdity that simply by declaring yourself the opposite sex, you become that. That's an absurd notion, and it's really dangerous for our society to accept something that absurd, because then what happens when maybe this guy decides he wants to compete in junior varsity level? Why not? He can say, well, I identify as a teenager now, and or having him compete against maybe older athletes where he's going to have a huge advantage. There's nothing really to prevent that kind of absurdity if we accept that people are who they are simply by how they feel rather than reality.
I might be going a little off on a tangent here, but I do that. I really think what we're seeing is we have seen this come out of academia and out of sort of theory and, oh, well, what if there's no such difference in gender? And I think this got kicked around in university gender studies programs a lot. And now it's spilled out into society and it's taken on a life of its own. And I think all of these people who talked about it theoretically now are afraid to say, wait, this is a mistake. I think we've got the snowball thing going on and nobody wants to admit that maybe they made a mistake. And so they just keep digging in their heels deeper and deeper and deeper, and it gets more and more ridiculous. And every time we think it can't get any more ridiculous than this, somebody says, hold my beer, and it goes even further. And we really, people, we need to start standing up and saying, this is ridiculous. The emperor has no clothes. Leah Thomas is a man.
Exactly.